Hello and welcome to WorldCanvass from International Programs at the University of Iowa. I'm Joan Kjaer. WorldCanvass is coming to you from the Senate Chamber of the Old Capitol Museum on the campus of the University of Iowa, and we're very happy to have you with us tonight. This is the final program in our four-part series on the rise of public opinion in China. We're exploring the influence of public opinion on political reform, political trust, foreign policy, and public discourse. Earlier segments of the series have addressed political reform, trust in governmental authority, and foreign policy. And tonight we're going to take a look at the effects of public opinion on public discourse, concentrating particularly on the new and ever-expanding world of social media. We have a wonderful panel joining us tonight, and I'll introduce them. Just to my left is Judy Pollenbaum, professor in the School of Journalism and Mass Communication here at the University of Iowa. Thank you, Judy, for being with us.
Thanks for having us.
Pleasure. And next to her is Shunwei Wu, graduate student here at the University of Iowa, also in the School of Journalism and Mass Communication. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
And at the far end, we have Lu Shen. Nice to see you, Lu Shen, an undergraduate student, also in journalism here at the University of Iowa. So this is going to be a fun topic. I think all of us like to learn about how people in other parts of the world from our own communicate. And of course, we can look at newspapers, we can look at television, all kinds of media. And then especially tonight, I'd like to talk a little bit about social media, as we have in some earlier segments of this program. I think there's nobody who could better introduce us to that whole range of communication than you, Judy. So let me ask you to describe the media landscape in China.
Well, I guess the best way to describe it is vast and variegated. There was a time when the scope of media outlets and information was rather narrow. There have been periods in the past when the content has been very homogeneous, but since the late 70s, and particularly since the early 90s, there's been an explosion of all kinds of media and all kinds of genres, so it's really hard to generalize about the media in China now. Of course, a vast proportion of it is entertainment media, educational media, background media, so a great deal of people's media consumption is not explicitly political, although the political scientists, which we're not, probably would say everything is political, which I think I agree with.
Well, help us understand, there are some sources of news that are official government sources of news, or television channels that are sponsored by the national government, and then are there also some commercial or non-governmental channels?
Well, it's very hard to pigeonhole media outlets because theoretically there is no independent media in China. All media outlets are accountable in some way to a government agency and ultimately to the propaganda department and propaganda bureaus at various levels and so forth. But media have varying degrees of autonomy. They have different roles. Certain things are expected of newspapers that are explicitly official Communist Party organs. Other things are expected of newspapers that maybe are municipal or evening papers or specialized papers, and the degree of control over media outlets varies tremendously by time, place, circumstance, personalities, and can be unpredictable. It can change over time. And so the whole idea of censorship is much more complicated than that simple word might imply.
Yeah.
Show your Iowa pride, the Iowa Hawk Shop, where Iowa shops. The ultimate collection of Iowa Hawkeye merchandise, gifts, and apparel. Help support the University of Iowa. All proceeds benefit men's and women's athletic teams and student programs. The Iowa Hawk Shop, where Iowa shops. Show your Iowa pride. Call 1-800-HAWK-SHOP or visit www.hawkshop.com.
Well, you're a journalist with a lot of experience with various parts of the world and the ways journalism operates, but I know China is a specialty for you. You look at the way journalists operate here in the United States, and we tend to think that, you know, sort of anything goes, you can do whatever you want to do because we're not censored by the government. People may disapprove, but there's no real censorship. First of all, is that way too simplistic and not true at all of our own system? And in the second place, how does one judge something like censorship when you look at China?
Well, of course, you know yourself it's way too simplistic.
Yeah.
There's an interesting finding across systems in countries and contexts that is media accounts in any given country tend to, overall, there may be exceptions, but overall reflect the foreign policy positions of the government. And that holds for the United States, go figure. So there are many factors beyond overt management of media that go into selecting, covering, and crafting media accounts. And cultural understandings, expectations, stereotypes, narrative tropes, all sorts of things go into the way Americans cover news. In China, you have this mixture of all the usual, you know, time constraints on media and certain news values, and sometimes political interference, often kind of vague general directives about things that should or shouldn't be covered or emphasized, that are filtered down, sometimes in documents, sometimes verbally. There's a socialization process, so journalists kind of know what they're expected to do and what they're expected not to do. Bold journalists in China are constantly testing and sort of creating coalitions to foster the kind of journalism they want to do. So it's again, a really complex picture.
Well, yes, please.
I just want to jump in here about the issue about censorship. And I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing in the sense that it actually spawned a lot of creativity in the way people express their opinions. Because in China, everybody knows there are government censorship. And that's why people figure out creative ways to go around that censorship. And they use kind of pictures, innuendos, sarcasm. They make up new words, new terms, new idioms to express their opinion. And I think that is a really positive development that came out of government censoring public opinion. So we don't I don't think we should just look at censorship and, oh, it's a monster, everybody is trying to get us, but it's actually fostering a lot of good things that's based on public's intelligence.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. I see you nodding, Lou.
Yeah, I think it's really, people are really forced to be creative in this way. I remember that after Xi Jinping visited America last year, people started calling him Winnie the Pooh. Because a picture of him walking with President Obama just looks like a picture of Winnie the Pooh walking with Tigger. So people started calling him Winnie the Pooh. I don't know if that term is blocked now, but
Yeah.
And one thing, new media and the rise of the internet and the sort of the inevitability of information everywhere has done is it's actually made the censorship apparatus more transparent. People are totally conscious of it.
Really?
And constantly toying with it.
Yeah.
I think the entertainment aspect as well is really important in a way that censorship plays into public opinion, because sometimes you can watch a piece of news article, pick out like a couple of keywords and make fun of the entire news segment, and it becomes something to make fun of the system as well. So I'm sure many of you know about the CCTV segment that's asking people, are you happy in China? And we all know that 你幸福吗 is the same as what is your last name? And there's an old guy that says, my last name is Liu or something. Anyway, so that kind of becomes like a running joke among Chinese social media, and to just make fun of the idiocracy of this kind of state-controlled media.
Yeah. Okay, so we've kind of talked a little bit about state control, censorship, and so on, and the ways to get around censorship. But give us an idea of what young people your age, are doing on social media. We've heard about Renren, Weibo, and WeChat is another that I know is hugely popular there, which allow you really to do just about anything whenever you're near, whenever you're in a city that's wired up, and you can get access through your little phone. It's incredible how much people are attached to their devices in Beijing, at least, from my own experience. What are you doing on social media all the time?
trade gossip.
Trade gossip, yeah.
We share news.
Yeah.
We share our moments in our life.
Yeah.
It's very common that before we start eating, everybody has to take a picture of the food, and then we post it online.
That's for Chinese people.
Yeah,
Food is
like
awesome.
eating.
So, I think the kind of entertainmentization of media is seeped through in every single aspect of our daily lives. And I don't know if you noticed, but young people don't really read the news. Here too, I teach an undergrad class of 300 people, and they're dead when we talk about newsmaking. But when we talk about Gossip Girls and Real Housewives, they are instantly alive. So same in China. We don't really like to talk about serious stuff like Xi Jinping or the government, not a protest. We don't really care about that. I think even though there are some political news that gets talked about by young people, it's often goes the peripheral route rather than the more direct, there's a central meeting in the party or that kind of thing. It's more like maybe a police officer beat up a little merchant on the street, and that became a huge news. And police officer becomes the stand-in for the government system as a whole, whereas the merchant is the stand-in for everybody who are the little people who doesn't get a voice. And that kind of news actually gets more traction than the actual political, hardcore, boring stuff.
You're going to have a 3D card.
Why are you taking it, Tish?
So the key thing here is that
are over 24,000 bridges in Iowa. But only one connects University of Iowa hospitals and clinics to Iowa River Landing. From pediatrics and women's health to cardiology and routine exams, world-class medical care can be found at a new, convenient location in Coralville. Iowa River Landing is here, and it's designed just for you. For an appointment, call 319-467-2000.
And what about, in the last segment of this program, we were talking about foreign policy, for example. Is there much discussion about what's happening outside China among your friend groups?
Maybe not my friend groups at my age, but older people, or people older than me, the people that I follow.
Yeah.
We obviously have very different friend groups, because my friends all talk about the US and Japan, because that's what I'm focusing on. But I'm focusing more on popular culture. So it's really interesting the dynamics that goes on when things like the anti-Japanese protest happens, and the people who are fans of the Japanese culture, they react in a way that is really contradictory with their own interests, because on the one hand, they love Japanese culture. On the other hand, they're still Chinese. They're really conscious of the fact that Japanese are trying to take advantage of China. So they are standing in a very strange territory when it comes to foreign affairs, because it's the clash between two different social circles.
You know, a couple of times there has been mention of the clash between China and Japan. I wonder if you could just very briefly summarize some of the most recent incidents. What, for an American who doesn't really know what is currently happening in public opinion between Japan and China, could you fill us in?
One of the things I noticed recently is the close down of the Weibo from Asahi News, 朝日新闻. They closed down one day without notice. We don't know why. And it's really strange because that media is actually very pro-China. So people don't know why it is suddenly shut down. But the Chinese side is back up now, but the Weibo is not yet back up. So that's one, I don't know if it's one of the backlashes of the anti-Japanese thing or not. So.
But there really is a history, and it's very directly related to World War II and the fact that Japan invaded China, and the carryover from that is very, very strong. And a lot of Americans don't realize that, you know, that whole Asia and particularly China part of World War II, particularly young Americans, and also don't realize that Russia and China the Soviet Union and China were our allies, whereas kind of the memory of that and the memory that's passed down from parents to children and in schools is quite strong. So some of the things that elicit very strong backlashes have to do with Japanese textbooks and accounts about World War II and paying homage to Japanese martyrs of World War II and the behavior of Japanese politicians, and it just keeps coming up in China.
Yeah. Well, I think, Lou, I'm going to ask you a question about, you wrote a wonderful series of articles that appeared in the Daily Iowan last week or the week before. Really, really extraordinary, 3 very long, comprehensive articles. And I should ask you to describe what you were trying to talk about within those articles, but you were discussing things like freedom. What does freedom mean? What does home mean to you? Tell me something about what you learned about fellow Chinese students here on campus when you were asking them about their feelings about home, freedom, and so on?
I think every study abroad student feels that they are sort of alienated to home after they have been in the States for a long time. And about freedom, I think to us, it's like the green light across the bay of Gatesby's house before we came to the United States. After we came here, I think we tend to become more cynical.
Mm-hmm. Meaning that some of the things that you thought would be the case in the United States were not things you experienced?
Maybe United States is just it's not as it's not like a paradise that we thought before we came.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I spent part of this year and last year teaching in Hong Kong, and had some classes that were primarily mainland students at the master's level. Mm-hmm. And Hong Kong doesn't have firewalls around the internet like the mainland does, and so these young people came to Hong Kong and could immediately join Facebook and access whatever they wanted. And they said, well, for a couple of weeks it was really cool, and then it was like, there's really not that much to look at.
Yeah, yeah. And for you, Shanwei, what is the principal area of research that you're undertaking for your PhD?
I'm doing fandom studies. Right now, I'm focusing on animation, manga, and games. So in that area, we actually see a lot of what I talked about, the kind of creative words, expressions came out of that area and spread into the more mainstream culture. So that's why I'm trying to study that kind of thing.
Yeah, sure. And has your experience here in the U.S. Been what you expected before you came, would you say?
Well, I came here, I actually went to Canada 10 years ago, so it's nothing new to me. Canada and U.S. are not that different. But I guess what I found in the U.S., I guess, is really very similar to China, where we have a two-party system in the U.S. In China, in terms of public opinion in general, about the government, about foreign affairs overall, there's also two kinds of ways people express in general. I'm talking very, very generalized terms. So one is the one that's pro-government, nationalist. The other is more like Western intellectuals that's pro the US. So I don't, in a sense, it's actually very similar, the kind of opinions expressed in the Chinese social media sphere and the US social media sphere. So.
Yeah.
Show your Iowa pride, the Iowa Hawk Shop, where Iowa shops. The ultimate collection of Iowa Hawkeye merchandise, gifts, and apparel. Help support the University of Iowa. All proceeds benefit men's and women's athletic teams and student programs. The Iowa Hawk Shop, where Iowa shops. Show your Iowa pride. Call 1-800-HAWK-SHOP or visit www.hawkshop.com.
Yeah, is the notion of free speech the same in China as what we think of as free speech here in the U.S., Judy?
Well, we have a very kind of codified view of free speech, because we have our First Amendment and we have our, the founding fathers who made sure to enshrine that, and it's sort of a holy grail for journalism. I think in China there's a sort of sense of abandon about speech, where as long as you don't, go out in the middle of the street and condemn your nation's leaders, you can say anything you want to friends and family, and even to strangers on the bus, and it's kind of a no-holds-barred atmosphere. Plus, there's a very vibrant, sort of expressive scene, or many scenes throughout China. My older son is a jazz musician, living and working and playing and teaching in Beijing, and we communicate by WeChat, by the way. yeah. And I guess it was this past Spring Festival, the Lunar New Year, which is the biggest Chinese holiday. One of China's most famous rock musician, Cui Jian, who had been touring and was still just as famous, but had been out of the official picture for a while, was on the Beijing TV Spring Festival gala. And so there's a kind of insider culture and outsider culture, but the outsider cultures occasionally come into the official culture, and it's very blurry, and there's a lot of variety available, and people can really indulge their own interests in all kinds of ways.
Yes. Do you feel that young people maybe under 30 or so, are strongly engaged in the political discussions about China's future and all of that? I mean, do you feel that this is a time of sort of activism among China's youth, or no?
I guess it depends on how you define activism. We are very vocal about certain things and not very vocal about other things. So we're very vocal when a celebrity gets pregnant. And less vocal when the party Congress meets. So there are different ways people are active on the social media. And I don't necessarily think entertainment media is less important than political activism. Yeah. And people can have their very strong opinions about celebrities as well. So I think at least we're moving in the right direction in terms of the way people are expressing themselves.
Yeah, I agree with her. One of the students that I interviewed this summer, she actually told me that her 22nd birthday wish was China can become more democratic. And there are some kinds of young people over there in China, so I don't think, and I think they're more willing to express themselves online, not fear. They don't have so much fear of being censored or something. Yeah, they're more outspoken.
Yeah. Wow, it's been such a pleasure to have you all here for this discussion tonight about social media and public discourse in China. Thank you. So Lu Shen and Shenwei Wu and Judy Pallenbaum, thanks very much. You've been listening to the final installment of our 4-part series on the rise of public opinion in China. The entire series and all WorldCanvass programming can be found on the Hawkeye Network, on iTunes, KRUI, and on the International Programs website, which is international.uiowa.edu. So thank you for being with us tonight, and join us next time when our topic will be the social impact of sustainability. For UI International Programs, the Hawkeye Network, the Pentacrest Museums, and KRUI, I'm Joan Kjaer. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.